I woke up, it's 3 a.m. I'm full of panic and dread, thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong the day before, all the mistakes that I potentially made, and thinking about all the things I need to do. I try and tell myself to go back to sleep, but funnily enough, that's not what my brain wants to do at that time. Have you been there? I certainly have. This happened to me a few weeks ago, and this is what made me really think about how can we, as busy professionals, manage our well-being when we do have lots of things to think about. And we do have more knowledge of lots of different ways to do this than potentially ever before. Me, myself, I'm a therapist, so I've got lots of ways to manage, but how can we use this knowledge to really help us to manage stress when we can't eliminate stress? So this really led me to think about something called the Yerkes-Dodson law. So this is a theory based and looking at the relationship between stress and task performance. So if you have stress on one side and task performance on the other. So this is the idea that when we have low demands around us, there's little release of the stress hormones that help us to focus and attend to things. And as we have some demands, then these stress hormones really help us to really focus on the task in hand. It draws attention to the thing we need to focus on. But if we have too much stress, then these stress hormones can actually interfere with focus and attention. So imagine like a tightrope. So someone's trying to walk across a tightrope. So too little stressed, if we're too relaxed, we might kind of lose that footing a little bit. But if we have too much, we might be too stressed, kind of too wobbly, too anxious to kind of walk across the tightrope. So it's trying to think of the middle level of stress. So I can hear you already saying to me, but the reason I've come to this video is because I am a busy person and I will have lots of demands on me. So what we're going to think about here is how we can really first focus on what demands we do have and then use this law to help us. So often me myself, because I have lots of demands on me, I often think, well, I'm always just going to be busy and I just have to manage it. And sometimes we don't really audit the things that we are doing, the demands on us. And I think sometimes there's lots of hidden demands. So often we don't think of mental load as a demand, for example. So I might think of work, the tasks I've got to do at work, the things I've got to do at home. So then when I get home, I've got to put a wash on, I've got to plan my meal, the people I've got to call, the friends I've got to get in touch with. But we might not think of those things in of itself being a load, that I've got to remember those things, that I'm thinking about what I'm having for dinner and planning that and planning what I've got in the fridge, whether that does make a meal or whether I've got to go out, whether I am kind of eating healthily or not. So often we don't acknowledge that the mental load is part of our demands. So often there's missed demands, and often we don't audit our demands as busy people. We might say yes to things, and then we don't think about actually, are these all things I need to do? What are the necessary tasks? Sometimes the task audit, including the mental load, is a really good thing to do, to start to think about, are there any demands? Yeah. But if we can't get rid of demands, or if we've kind of audited it, got rid of some demands, we're then on to the next step, which is the step I think I really missed that led to me being up at 3 a.m. So this step is about really noticing where we are on that curve. So where am I? Am I at a place where actually the stress, the current demands I have is fueling my motivation, or have I gone down? Am I starting to go down the other side where it's interfering with that? And I think it's tricky because it changes day to day. So if you're anything like me, this can change due to multiple things, and the demands on us can change day by day, which sometimes I don't think we acknowledge enough. We assume I've got a busy job, and every day is just busy. But the demands do change on us, and our fuel, what we've got to give, changes. So part of it is noticing where we are on this curve. So we can do this in a few ways. So one is having a check-in with ourselves. So this really looks like taking that time to think, How am I? Am I worrying more than usual? What are my energies levels like? And taking time to note this down. Also focusing on our kind of physical symptoms. So stress often shows itself in the body. So am I feeling tense? Or have I got pain? Am I suffering with headaches? Am I finding it hard to focus? So really take time to think and notice this. And really take time to notice your signs that things are getting more difficult. Mine is worry. That's a big sign that I'm starting to go into the demands are too much. And it's starting to impair performance. But we're all different. So really, one, take time to think of your signs. And these signs, again, they might be different in different circumstances, but make a plan to start to notice these changes. So whether it's once a week, checking in and asking ourselves those questions, whether it's having a morning or evening check-in to really think about what might help the next day. But the number one key is to notice where we are. If we don't notice, we can't change things. And often I think the kind of curve is more slow build up. So, okay, I feel a bit more stressed than yesterday, but maybe that doesn't really hit on my radar because I'm really busy and I'm still okay. I'm still fine. I'm still functioning. It's okay. And it's more slow build up a lot of the time. So really noticing to check in is really helpful because when we're at the other side of the curve, it just takes more of us to get back to where we want to be on that curve. So the earlier we notice, the better. So it's really, once we've done the audit of tasks, is there anything we can get rid of? Really, the key is starting to think about how we can notice where we are on that curve, what signs there are that could help us to think about where we are on that curve, and really making that part of our routine. So once we have really kind of noticed where we are on that curve, that in of itself is really, really helpful. But then it's also really helpful to think about, okay, so I know where I am, but I'm still really busy. So what am I going to do in this moment in time? That's where we really think about our coping strategies. And this is very nuanced for everyone, which is, I think, again, where despite all the knowledge we have now on well-being and things that might help, where we can get stuck. I know I felt this because we know lots of ways that might help. So why isn't it helping? And then we can feel low and it can feel really hard to then try things that might help. So one really good thing that really is helpful is to think about coping strategies that help short term but have longer term negative consequences. So that might add to the demands, and long term coping strategies. And these often short term might not feel as good as the short term coping strategies, but longer term they really help. So, an example of a short term coping strategy is avoidance. So, we might avoid having that difficult conversation or avoid doing that difficult task. And short term, that feels good because I don't have to do that thing that I was worried about. But longer term, I'm still worried about it. It's still a demand on my list. Other short term coping strategies can be alcohol, substances. So, short term, it helps, but longer term, it often keeps things going. And examples of longer term coping strategies are problem solving. So, thinking about that difficult task and the steps we have to do. Mindfulness, so really noticing our thoughts and feelings as thoughts and feelings and taking a step back from them. Exercise. So, again, really thinking about what coping strategies you are using and whether they add or take away. And we can trick ourselves with this because generally, most of us, for example, would say exercise is a really helpful thing with our mood and general well-being. But if we're using exercise to avoid that difficult task, so I'm going to exercise instead, that might not be as helpful in that moment. So it's really thinking about what are we using in that moment and the function. Is it helping or is it not? And this is, I think, where sometimes We have more knowledge than ever, but it's really important to really focus the coping strategies on us, what's helpful in that moment. And that's sometimes, I think, where we need to spend a little bit more time thinking about, is what we're using helping or not helping, and in the long term. And another thing that can really help us to focus on our well-being as busy professionals is actually a bit of an interesting one. So it's how we think about stress itself, which I know sounds pretty strange, but research has found that how we think about stress actually can change task performance, and also how stress exhibits itself in our bodies. So the actual stress response can be less or more mediated by how we think about stress. So a study that gave people the task of doing a presentation. Prior to giving that presentation, people were shown a separate presentation on stress. And one set of participants had information given to them on that presentation of how stress was really helpful in terms of tasks and focusing attention. And the other group were given a presentation on how stress is not helpful and negatively impacts performance. And interestingly, those who had the presentation on how helpful stress was performed better on their presentation and had less of a stress response than those in the other group. So it's also starting to think about our relationship with stress and starting to think about how it can help our task performance, as that's been found to really help us. So today we've really focused on how, as busy professionals, we can help to put things into place to help us. But sometimes we do get just overwhelmed with the situation, and it can be really hard to focus or even think about where we are in terms of the Yerkes-Dodson law or what might be helpful in that moment. So check out my video on how to manage overwhelm. See you soon.